Hi, everyone. We are going live today with Dr. Kelly Livingston, and we will be talking all about supporting mental health, supporting mental health naturally. So I am going to wait for Dr. Livingston to come on. Dr. Livingston and I actually went to naturopathic medical school together. And, I really love chatting with her because she really runs her practice the way that I do in terms of really getting to the root cause. Let's see. So let's get Dr. Livingston here. And we're just waiting for Dr. Livingston to come on. And we're going to be talking all about supporting mental health naturally today. Hi there. Hi, Dr. Livingston.
How are you?
Good. How's it going? Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday to you too.
Let me just adjust myself here. All right. I think this is a really important topic, especially right now, because, we're all stuck at home and anxiety and depression, I think, is going up because of that. So tell me a little bit about how you support mental health in your practice.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this as well. And I feel like there's potential for this to turn into a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 part series.
I know, right?
There's so many ways. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. And honestly, I was thinking about this coming into this and didn't really prepare much. I was taking a shower before I joined you. And I was thinking, when it comes to the root cause of mental health issues, there is so much we can talk about, right? We can talk about diet and lifestyle and stress and neurotransmitters and gut health, and we can go crazy with all the underlying causes. But for me, and I think for you as well, and this might not always happen in the first visit with a patient, but the most important thing as far as root cause goes is kind of going back into childhood and into development and emotions and where we store them in our body and how those can then potentially trigger some of the maybe more physical underlying causes like gut health and neurotransmitter imbalance, and then intervening with nutrition. So I got really excited thinking about kind of the progression of the root causes and how deep you can really go with that all. So
we can start all the way at the beginning when it comes to mental health and how it really starts from day 0 of your life. So tell me about how you would target that in terms of trauma and even nutrition in childhood.
Yeah. So again, as we always say, it depends on what the person first comes in for. So let's just assume that they first come in with a mental health complaint or issue. Let's say maybe anxiety or depression that's been present for X amount of years. Obviously, the first thing I'll ask them is how long they've been experiencing that. And maybe they say it's something that started in young adulthood. Well, then I'm going to go back even further and say, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about childhood then and before those symptoms started. And very often you'll find that there's some manifestation of those symptoms from the beginning. So it might look differently, in a 4 or 5-year-old, and then turn into something what they might think of as a new symptom in maybe their 20s or 30s, or when they become a parent. Or it might have been a similar, pattern, maybe just to a little bit lesser degree. So that's kind of the first thing that I want to establish is how long in the patient's mind has this been an issue? And then digging a little bit deeper to see when some of these signs and symptoms were actually starting. I was laughing last night. I took a picture of a responsibility chart that my daughter had organized into these very detailed rainbow patterns and colors. And I sent my family a text like, oh, wow, did I give my daughter OCD? And not to, take light of that or joke about a diagnosis, but it was interesting to me to see an almost 5-year-old, having this excitement about being so organized about her responsibility chart. So that might be one example of, digging a little bit deeper and seeing when there were signs and symptoms of something.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you said that, sometimes it starts in young adulthood. And I think one of the correlations I see there, I mean, when we're dealing with any chronic illness, but, I think especially mental health illness, it's not ever just one thing, right? It's like 10 different things. So today I hope that we will talk about all 10 things in just a little snippet of all 10 things. But oftentimes when it starts in young adulthood, I think it can be very much related to puberty, and the changes in the hormones and what's going on there. And so there's often a hormonal basis in terms of the mood issues and mental health illness too. So we always want to look at hormones. And for women, we look at estrogen levels and progesterone. And then for men, we're looking at the same thing actually, and testosterone. And then your thyroid hormones as well. So I think puberty is an interesting time. And I often see that my patients are starting these mental health, issues around puberty. But then I think it's really interesting because I think you're right. It also starts way sooner than that. And
I think around puberty, because of those hormonal changes, they're kind of heightening, our experiences and our emotions.
Increases like tenfold. Yeah. Because you're now adding hormones. And I mean, also just being a teenager in today's world is not the most easy thing. And then so you layer that on top of it, and then you layer diet and, and then now a child becoming a teen and now probably in charge of their own diet. And then that plays a role. I think it's interesting that, you said, let's start all the way in childhood, because I think there's so many things to think about. So I think one is, how was the birth? How was the delivery? I think there can actually be traumas there that we need to address. I think traumas can also be carried down to our children. So if you're dealing with trauma as a mother, if you're dealing with trauma when you were pregnant, if there's a lot of trauma in your family line, that can actually carry on to your child too. And then the traumas that we get as children, and as parents, we don't even know that we're giving our kids trauma sometimes, but like the whole OCD thing, like, did that come from you? Did it come from, because you're like, you need things to be perfect and all that. And then that could be a form of trauma too. So all of that we kind of need to piece together. The way I piece that together in my practice is two things. So I love to use as the basis of my therapy. So I call my therapy emotional release therapy, but the basis of it is actually in something called emotion code. And if anyone is dealing with any mental health illness, I highly suggest you pick up that book, Emotion Code. And what I do with emotion code is I actually kind of travel into the patient's subconscious and find out where these traumas are lodged and what they are. So oftentimes, like, I'll give you my example. So for me, it was like going all the way back to when I was 5 years old. And my trauma, it sounds kind of silly, but my trauma was when my sister was born and I felt like my mom didn't love me anymore. And so a lot of my, some of the things that I was dealing with was actually, it was just because my sister was born, which is like, sounds like a really silly thing. But when we delve into my psyche, that was one of the things that was going on. And when we cleared that, I feel like I looked through life with different sets of goggles. Like, I mean, life looked just really different to me. So those are other traumas. I also think if you're a C-section baby, if you're not born vaginally, you're not getting the gut flora that you need to get. And gut bacteria is so important. And that balance of gut bacteria is so important in making optimal serotonin. And serotonin is your happy neurotransmitter. And so if you are born, not vaginally, also if you weren't breastfed, all of those can really play a role in your gut microbiome, which then affects, your neurotransmitters from the beginning. And then I think there's these points in our life where it gets worse, like puberty, and then maybe pregnancy, and then menopause, and all these shifts in our life can make, the underlying condition worse. I also think genetically, when it starts all the way as a kid, we want to look at genetics too. Yeah. And I think that's a whole conversation that we can maybe open up right now. And one of the things we look at as naturopathic doctors is something called the methylation cycle. So is that something that you look at in your practice when dealing with mental health?
Yeah, for sure. And especially like you said, if there's something that has been present since childhood, obviously gut health you're going to look into, and then methylation and other genetic factors, right? So there's lots of different genetic pathways that I might look at, and that will impact both how you build and manufacture your neurotransmitters. So for example, you need methylated or activated B vitamins to make a number of your neurotransmitters, but also there are other genetic pathways that will affect how you break down your neurotransmitters. So if you're not breaking down, for example, your excitatory catecholamines, you're going to be more predisposed to things like anxiety. So you have to both look at how you're building them and making them, and then how you're processing them.
Absolutely. Uh-oh.
Family.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And to your point, also, I think you said it was kind of silly that, your trauma was, when your sister was born. I think trauma can manifest in so many different ways, and then we'll hold on to that in our bodies in so many different ways. So, in addition to looking at genetics and how we're making these neurotransmitters, and maybe how diet and gut health are helping us make these neurotransmitters properly, you also have to look at that mind body connection, right? And are you aware of or residing in your body? Are you breathing? Are you, all these other mind body processes that from a young, stage might not have been in place, whether it's from genetics, from a trauma, from nutrition, whatever it might be. If you aren't fully present in your body, that's going to correlate then to mental health issues later on.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's interesting when looking at mental health. So if you look at your family line and you say, okay, there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of anxiety, it doesn't necessarily mean though that you are going to get those things as well too. So, in naturopathic medicine, we have something called epigenetics. And what epigenetics is, okay, you're born with a set of genetics. And I usually like to say, well, that's what you're predisposed, what's predisposed to happen. But it really is what you do in your life that will affect how that genetics expresses itself. So if you do all the right things, which I'd like to talk about also, like what are all those right things? We'll talk about that in a second. Then it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up with bipolar or depression or anxiety or, et cetera. You might be predisposed for that. But if you do all the right things, you won't put pressure on those pathways, and you might make your neurotransmitters quite fine. So just because you see it in your family line, I don't want you guys to think like, oh, okay, so if genetics play such a big role, then does that mean I'm just going to get depression and there's nothing I can do about it? So there's absolutely something you can do about it. And we can also support all of those pathways as well too, so that they work a little better. I like to say those pathways are kind of like gears that turn. And so if you're, let's say, missing some variants there in your genetics, they will turn a little slower, but we can do things to kind of speed up those gears. The other thing is I like to think of them as gears, and like your epigenetics or what you do in your life is basically you putting stuff on top of those gears. And so those gears don't move very well. So we take that stuff off, which is all the stuff we're going to talk about in a second. And then those gears start to move a little bit faster. And then you give support, those gears will start to move pretty fast. The thing with methylation though, is it's hard because when you supplement in terms of methylation, sometimes you'll like overdo it. Sometimes you'll underdo it. And it can be really tricky when dealing with supplementation. And so I don't love to focus on the genetics. I think I like to focus on what's putting pressure on the genetics, and let's remove that. And let's watch how those gears start to turn faster and better.
Yeah, especially with the methylation, a lot of people maybe that have done their own research looking for some natural alternatives might come across, supplementing with B vitamins and B12 and folate and what those do, and how they can certainly in a lot of clinical studies help with depression. Or you might, Google magnesium is helpful, and all those things might be true. And we can talk more about nutritional deficiencies as well. But as you said, if you're not addressing things downstream, then just taking those things might not help. And furthermore, they can exacerbate symptoms and conditions as well. So it's important to think about the whole picture.
Yeah. Someone's asking what's methylation. Actually, Dr. Livingston mentioned it earlier. So methylation is basically this process of kind of turning on, let's just make it easy and say it's turning on your certain B vitamins and kind of turning on certain pathways. If you are missing certain genes, then you might not turn on those pathways correctly. And it might actually, you'll see it in your family line. Like you'll see there's like depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia. You'll kind of see it in your family line. And what that means is that we need to do a number of things. We need to look at what's on top of those gears that are turning. So what kind of toxins do you have? Is your lifestyle optimized? Is your nutrition optimized, et cetera? And so remove all those things. And then if those gears are still turning slow, then we can give some supplementation. I don't like to only do supplementation, though. I don't think it's really enough. And someone's asking, like, what's a supplementation for an 80-pound-year-old, 10-year-old? We can't just answer that question because it's so specific to the patient and there could be problems where you take supplements and then it turns things on too much, and then you need to turn it off. And so supplementation in terms of mental health is very tricky. And it's not very easy. So it's definitely not something I think people should try to do on their own. Like if you have depression or if you have anxiety, I wouldn't necessarily suggest you just take like 5-HTP, which is the precursor to creating serotonin. Because what you can do is you'll turn on one pathway and then this other pathway needs support. And then you might go into, you know, bipolar or something else, because now your neurotransmitters are, you might feel good for a little bit of time and then it kind of goes overboard. It's almost like this seesaw that we really need to balance out.
And I think you hit on a good point, and that's a good question. You know, an 80-pound-year-old, you know, say it's I forgot what you said the details were, but say it's 80-pound-year-old boy, and you know they have anxiety or depression or ADD. When I first started practicing, actually, I used to run a lot more neurotransmitter tests, and I definitely will utilize them sometimes now. But I did find that even that was kind of looking a little bit too small and not looking.
That's so funny. I did too at the very beginning. Yeah. And I
so you know
don't rarely do those nowadays.
Yeah. I agree.
Because it's so much about the pressure that's on the system.
Yep. You might find, you know, serotonin and GABA are low or dopamine's too high. You know, all these neurotransmitters, right, have an amino acid that is a precursor. So like you said, with serotonin, it'll be tryptophan, 5-HTP. With dopamine, you might be looking at tyrosine or phenylalanine, et cetera, you know, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And you can measure those urinary metabolites and you can say, oh, this is low, give this supplement or give this amino acid or give this B vitamin that helps with that pathway. And yeah, maybe sometimes that will help, but mental health is not one size fits all like that. And as you said, you then might be imbalancing another pathway. So really looking much more kind of globally and bigger picture. And as you say, all those things that are going on the gears, or maybe, you know, preventing absorption of those amino acids from food versus just taking a bunch of supplements and kind of seeing what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me then, if then we're not going to be talking too much about supplementation, what are the factors that you see that you will start to address? And like, I'll tell you mine too, but I'd like to hear what you kind of address in your practice. What's the list that you have to check off?
Yeah. So as always, you know, and again, I'm coming at this from, let's say someone came in with a mental health concern first, because sometimes they do come in with something else and it turns out, you know, we're going to go down this pathway first. Mm-hmm. But the first thing, like I said, I will talk about what traumas maybe have happened in life and how they process them and how their body responds. And then very importantly, are there any traumas that are lingering that are creating a more heightened sympathetic nervous system state? So are they kind of more prone to being in that fight or flight state? Mm-hmm. And vice versa? Are they prone to being in a more kind of inhibitory neurotransmitter dependent, almost like too calm state? So that is kind of tricky, and we can talk more about that for sure. But that's one of the first things I'll look at is kind of their natural tendencies and their responses to emotions, to traumas, you know, things that they're maybe holding on to. And then the second, and probably in that same first session, I'm really focusing on gut health and nutrition, kind of all in one big giant package. As you said, so many of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut, and there's that gut-brain axis that's so important. Again, controlling our nervous system, our parasympathetic and sympathetic, a lot of times has roots in the gut microbiome. So kind of addressing all of that. And nutrition. So that, again, that's a big category, but I think one of the first foundational things that I'll talk about. And then kind of going down the line, depending on the person and what other things they're presenting with, both, you know, lifelong medical history and currently, I will address things like hormone imbalances, as you said, toxins and toxic exposures. I will also look at not only environmental toxins, but things that they're maybe acquiring or, you know, being exposed to on a daily basis. So cleaning products, personal care products, things that they're kind of junking up their gears with, as you said. We might do a genetic analysis, sometimes maybe not, maybe they come in with one already. And I'll always talk about the basic foundations of health with them. So sleep, exercise, stress reduction, those are kind of givens whenever I see any patient, but especially someone that's struggling with any sort of mental health issue. So those are a lot of things, but those are kind of the main ones that I'll look at.
Well, so when I see someone with mental health dysfunction, so much of what's going on is stuff that they have control over. And I think that in conventional medicine, we're not told that, right? So you have depression, you have anxiety, you have this, you have that. Here's a medication, go home, take the medication, and, I'll check you in 3 months.
Yeah.
There's really no talk about what you're doing in your life. How can you change the things you're doing to really affect your mental health? So I think it's really important that people know that they have the power to really start to reverse some of these things. And I think there's some really things that I've found in my practice that I think everybody can do, and that they can help everybody across the board. And some of those things, so you were mentioning like nutrition, lifestyle. So I'd love to talk about what those things actually are and give people actual action items to do today. But I think for me, one of the first things is your morning is super important. So anyone who does any of my programs or who's my patient, I like to call it the magic morning. And so I actually did a post this morning about the magic morning. But what you do in the morning is so important because it kind of sets up your whole entire day, therefore setting up your whole entire week and your whole entire month and your whole entire life. And one of the main things, number one, is sunshine. Like if you can just get sunshine on your eyes, on your body, that's so important. And we know that's important because there's something called seasonal depression, right? When people aren't getting enough sun, and then people go into depression. And they've done studies where they tracked, men over the course of a whole year. And doesn't matter what season it is, as long as they're getting sun, those men had less depression, and women as well too. So I think it's really important because one of the things so I think right now we aren't getting a lot of sun. If you're not going outside, that's really going to affect your hormones, your neurotransmitters. So they've shown that going out into the sunshine actually increases your serotonin, which is that happy neurotransmitter we were talking about. And it also stimulates your hormones as well too. So it can really have an effect on your hormones. It
also helps to balance out your circadian rhythm too, which will help with another pillar, which would be sleep. And you're getting out into the sun right away, or, at least allowing some sunshine in right away. And I know you're a big fan of sun salutations, as am I, but getting movement and sunshine all at the same time when you wake up, and having that ritual will then help for a better night's sleep later on. And we'll talk about too.
Yeah. So I open all my windows. If I can, I'll just step outside. And even if you can just get 15 minutes of sun on your retina, on your eyes, and on your skin every morning, that's actually going to stimulate, your hormones and your neurotransmitters. And I think one of the problems is everyone's going out there and putting sunglasses on. And if you're wearing contact lenses or sunglasses, that can also affect how your retina is being affected by the sunshine too. So if you could go outside without anything on your eyes, exposing maybe at least your arms and your legs and your face, that actually is one thing that you can just implement. And it seems like it's not that important, but it's actually really, really important. And I know you love sun.
Yes.
I remember
it was hard
for
me to come inside. It's 1 p.m. here on the East Coast, and it's beautiful. It was really hard.
Yeah. And it can be hard if you're in an area, especially right now, that's not getting a lot of sun. But as much as possible, if you can do that, I think that's really important. And then still speaking about magic morning, I think it's really important to exercise in the morning and at least do like sun salutations, which if you don't know what those are, you can look on my on one of my posts. I talk about it. And I think that's so important because you're breathing, you're waking up the muscles, you're waking up the system, you're waking up the lymphatic system. Your body just went through detoxification at night, and then you're moving it all. And then hopefully after that, you have bowel movement. and it really just kind of stimulates your system to wake up in a way that stimulates your endorphins, your neurotransmitters, your hormones. Like all of those things are really important.
That's been one of my strategies as we've been, social distancing and my yoga studio is closed, is morning time movement and stretching, getting outside, implementing that at home the same way I would have gone to an early morning yoga class. And it's something that I've been talking to a lot of my patients about.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah. And then hot, cold showers in the morning is another really great one. You go hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. I have another post about that. And then you end in cold, and that actually also stimulates everything to wake up. And so if you just did those three things, so I have a whole list of other things that people can do, but if you just did those three things, it actually will wake up your neurotransmitters, your hormones, etc. And then the one thing I don't want you to do in the morning is drink coffee every day. Because coffee will actually stimulate, it will affect your hormones. And the reason why when you try to wean off of coffee, you get symptoms is because it's a drug. And it's going to affect your cortisol levels and all of your hormonal levels, etc. So the thing I don't want you to do is coffee. I'd rather you do all those other things to stimulate all your hormones and get your body moving. And most of us don't, right? Most of us roll out of bed, we take a shower, we make some coffee, we leave. And then we expect everything to be fine and dandy all day long and all year long. And we expect ourselves, to our bodies to work and our mental health to be really great.
So I will admit I am a coffee drinker, but when I have, I know my mental health triggers, and if I have times where anxiety or depression or something I'm dealing with, I know that that's one of the things that I'll give up. And, those closest to me know, like, oh, she's not drinking coffee, like she must be resetting herself right now. And I think once you find the balance with things like that, you know what you need to do, and it's just a matter of implementing it.
I think having coffee not every day would be like 3 times a week or 4 times a week. So you're not taking it like a drug and it really affecting your hormones.
And obviously if you're more prone to anxiety, something that's stimulating isn't going to be the best thing for you.
Right. Right.
And I've also been talking with a lot of my patients while they're still home about having morning rituals, and also, again, teaming with sleep, having bedtime rituals. But getting up, making the bed, having a system in place really can help when maybe there isn't structure throughout the rest of the day, and you might be more prone to falling into a depression or some sort of other mental health state that isn't as comfortable. So having that morning ritual is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone's asking about decaf. So I don't want you to drink decaf if it's like regular decaffeinated coffee. But there is a type of decaf that's made from a Swiss water method, and they actually decaffeinate the coffee with water. So if you look for organic Swiss water decaffeinated coffee, that would be okay to switch to. And that's usually what I use to wean people off of coffee. I actually talk more about this in my masterclass that I offer on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you wanted to join that masterclass, the link is in my on my profile. But that's an okay decaffeinated coffee to drink. There's also something called mushroom coffee. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah. So that's not made, it doesn't have caffeine. It's not made from coffee, but it kind of has like a taste of coffee a little bit. And it does give you, it's mushroom. So it gives you kind of a little bit of an umph if you're trying to switch over. And so there can be other problems there too if you go crazy with that. But it won't have that caffeine problem that I was talking about, where caffeine binds to a receptor and then causes things like cortisol and other hormones to go a little crazy. And then that affects your hormones, which can then affect your mood and your mental health. So let's talk a little bit about nutrition. What do you do in terms of nutrition when it comes to mental health?
So most of my patients are, again, same as, autoimmune condition, any sort of chronic health issue, are going to get an individualized, analysis of what they're eating, what they're putting in their body. I'll very often run food sensitivity and food allergy testing to see if there is a food that's inflammatory. a lot of mental health issues can kind of be traced back to inflammation in the body. So that's kind of a first screening tool that I'll run with people. And then the basic foundations of nutrition. So coming off sugar, balancing cortisol levels, talking about healthy carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates versus simple, talking about getting enough protein in the diet. Doesn't have to be animal-based. I focus a lot on plant-based nutrition in my practice, but getting those amino acid building blocks for the neurotransmitters is really important. Getting lots and lots of fruits and vegetables, again, very plant-based, getting all of your greens. So you have those naturally methylated B vitamins, again, helping build those neurotransmitters, and helping with detoxification, right? So if you're, a heavily plant-based diet with lots and lots of greens and herbs and things like that, you're going to help with those detox pathways that might be junking up the system a little bit. So those are some of the basics. And then again, kind of depends on what that person's issue is. But I do find that balancing and stabilizing blood sugar and cortisol through diet, nutrition is usually a pretty important component, and figuring out what foods are both inflammatory triggers and then maybe some kind of mood imbalance triggers. Especially in kids, I find that they will respond to foods pretty strongly with behavioral presentations. So a lot of times the first thing I'll do in kids is figure out what those triggers are. Is it gluten? Is it dairy? Is it sugar? Those are probably the most common ones, and eliminating those from the diet. That's kind of a start.
Yeah, definitely. Same for me. And I would say gluten, dairy, and sugar are what I see as the biggest triggers. If someone has some gastrointestinal imbalance, also like yeasty type foods, while we're kind of treating for any gut dysbiosis. So gut dysbiosis means that there's an imbalance in your microbiome. And as we talked about in our last live, there's this gut-brain axis where your gut bugs are so important in helping to make these neurotransmitters. So if you're feeding bad bugs, there's going to be, a problem there. I think high fiber foods are really important. Gotcha. Resistant starches are really important. And then, as you said, all those protein-rich foods, which would be things like eggs and nuts and seeds and fish. Mm-hmm. And the proteins are important because there are things like tryptophan, which we talked about earlier, which a lot of people know about that being in turkey. So when you eat a turkey meal and then you kind of get tired, that's actually because your serotonin is going up, and then melatonin can actually go up, and then you get tired because of that. But the tryptophan in there is what is one of the things that actually feeds your serotonin. So those high protein foods are really important. And then the colorful greens and all of that feeds what we were talking about earlier, which is the methylation pathways.
Healthy fats too.
Healthy fats, yeah. So fats line your nerves, and there's something, they're called myelin sheaths, and they're actually built of fats. And so fats are really important. So your omega-3s, your omega-6s, so that would be things like flax oil and fish oil and olive oil. Those are really important in terms of your diet as well too. So if you're not following a diet like this, if you're not avoiding some of those inflammatory foods and you have mental health dysfunction, or let's say just during quarantine, you've been eating poorly and you're noticing that your mood and your mental health is changing, it actually could be very much due to diet. I don't know, Dr. Livingston, what would you say in terms of diet, in terms of the percentage of how much that plays a role in someone's health when it's mental health related?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm very bad with numbers.
I would say 50%.
I would say even higher.
Yeah, or even higher.
I would say, between 50 and 75.
Yeah, it's something you're doing 3 to 5 times a day. You're sticking stuff in your mouth, and then you're expecting it to, well, first of all, if it's going to cause inflammation, then 3 to 5 times a day it could be causing inflammation.
Maybe we should go with 85.
I mean, we could go with 100, really. But it's that important, and I think that's the point I wanted to make, is that your diet is that important.
Yeah, I mean, you can have all the morning rituals, get all the sleep, be exercising, and if you're still eating crap, to be honest, then you're gonna feel like that.
Building blocks, right? So how do you expect your nervous system and your system to create neurotransmitters if you don't have the building blocks, for one? And then
And when it comes to the sugar and, you know, just fluctuations, whether it's, you know, affecting hormones, whether it's affecting cortisol or your sex hormones, if you're putting your body on a roller coaster ride with what you're putting in your body, then your mental health is going to go along
right,
for the ride.
right. Yeah,
You know.
absolutely. Yeah. So nutrition, really, 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 really
Yeah.
important.
Let's go with 95%.
Yeah, let's go with 95. um, and then let's talk a little bit about, there was another thing I wanted to talk about, which is neurotoxicity. So when you, everything we're exposed to nowadays, which is a lot of junk and stuff, basically can circulate through your system and become neurotoxic. So tell me a little bit about that and how you address that in your practice.
Yeah, so I might run like a heavy metal test. I might just be taking a case history and looking at what I think might be triggers for that person. I also talk a lot with people about food being toxic and being neurotoxic, and how your mood will respond to those foods and to the toxicity that's being created by those foods, and then how that toxicity translates into inflammation. And how that then is going to become symptomatic. So again, really kind of depends on what the triggers are for that person. And then how, if we can address those and reduce that toxicity, you're going to see those layers kind of peel back and those symptoms resolve.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's so much you can do to stop exposure. I think a really great resource is ewg.org. And on that website, they just kind of give you a lot of support in terms of like, how toxic is your makeup? How toxic is your, your mattress? How toxic is, et cetera. So there's a lot of resources there, so you can just start cleaning up your life one at a time.
Yeah, I think it's important to go one at a time, because I think it can get kind of
overwhelming.
Yeah. I recently bought this like amazing organic mattress, and I remember going crazy with researching, and even knowing what I know, feeling just so overwhelmed. So sometimes I'll have my patients pick one toxic exposure, again, whether it's based on a test that we've run or just based on me taking, a history of what they're putting in their bodies or have been exposed to, and picking one thing at a time.
Right.
Down the line.
So I have a program called Truly Transform that I do a masterclass for, and then I talk about the program. And in the program, I walk you through it one at a time so that you're not overwhelmed, because it's a very overwhelming thing to do. So we kind of walk through it. We go diet, and then we go morning ritual, and then we go bathroom, kitchen, I piece it all together because I think it can be super overwhelming. And when I first started doing this program, I kind of told everybody everything all at once. And my patients were like, okay, I should probably just be in a hole now. And
right.
But I
need to live in a bubble.
There's I can't breathe, basically. Yeah. But it's really about the load of toxins on your body. So if you start to just take things one at a time and just don't get overwhelmed, just start picking things off. Starting with diet, I think that's one thing that we have control over. Then you're just going to be taking off the load on your system. And so again, if you think of everything as gears, all those pathways are moving, and then you just have a bunch of crap, garbage on top of it, just take one piece of garbage off at a time. And you don't have to do everything all at once. And eventually you'll get there. Someone's asking, how do you get rid of child's tics? So tics can be very multifactorial. I think one of the things we do look at when we're looking at tics as naturopathic doctors is mineral levels, and looking at those levels like magnesium or other minerals that might be deficient. And then why are they deficient? Are they deficient because the child is super toxic and those minerals are being used up and depleted? Are they, is it low because of a genetic malfunction? And so we look at those things, but that's what I do, at least. What do you do, Dr. Livingston?
I'll usually do that first. Again, I'll look at food triggers, and then as you probably do as well, I'll look at any sort of history of strep. And if it's a sudden presentation of the tics, that's totally different than if it's something that's been going on for a longer period of time. It kind of happens suddenly and rapidly. And if there are other mental health issues associated with it, so that'll be part of my kind of first step in looking at the underlying cause, but very similar to what you described. I've had some good success using homeopathic remedies in patients with chronic tics as well. So again, going to depend on the person, and the remedy will match up with their symptom picture.
Yeah, yeah. Homeopathy, I'm glad you brought it up. In a mental health picture, I always use homeopathy. For those of you who don't know what homeopathy is, it's a form of medicine where they take things like herbs and minerals and then they dilute them. So they're very dilute remedies. And what they do is they'll stimulate the system to cause a change. So I love homeopathy, especially in kids. It works so beautifully because kids are so vital. They have such a vital force that you just kind of open up the system, and then the system starts to do all the things it's supposed to do. And it's not you doing anything. It's actually just the body doing it. And I like to call it, like, if you're familiar with acupuncture, I like to call it, it's kind of like acupuncture in a bottle. It just kind of opens up the systems. It stimulates where it needs to stimulate, and then the body will respond. And I think it's really beautiful because it can move things like traumas. It can remove, like, mental, emotional traumas that we're holding on to, and they're kind of stuck in our system. That emotion code technique I was telling you guys about earlier will move those traumas too. So we need to move those traumas both mentally and physically from our system. And I do think homeopathy can target those. So you give someone like a really good remedy, they have a dream that night. Like if it was me, like when I was 5 years old and I was traumatized by my sister being born, and then I wake up and I feel so much better and I feel lighter because that trauma has kind of moved out of my system. So that's one way homeopathy can work, but we can do it for physical things like tics. And someone's asking, what's the homeopathic treatment for tics? But it's not just one remedy. So when we do homeopathy, it's really individual, like it's the most individualized, I feel like, form of medicine we do, because we need to know everything. We need to know physically what's going on with you, mental, emotionally what's going on with you. What are the weird things that happen? Like, do you stick your foot out from under the blanket at night? That's a different remedy from, you liking something else. So we need to know all the specifics of you as a person in order to prescribe the right homeopathic remedy for the person asking about tics.
I use homeopathy a lot in mental health issues as part of my counseling as well. So I have a background in psychology. So a lot of my patients that maybe don't know that will end a visit like, you should have been a therapist. I'm like, you didn't know you were coming in for therapy, did you? And I'll use remedies with that type of a visit a lot, because just the process of the intake and the process of asking these in-depth questions ends up enabling our relationship to kind of blossom and be cultivated, and they open up a little bit more. And then also when I explain to them what remedy I've chosen and maybe what some of those keynotes, which not everyone will do, but it's something that I do with some of my patients, where I explain why that was chosen. That's part of the healing process. And then it's also sometimes part of them understanding maybe what that underlying trauma was that they need to release, that maybe they didn't think was a big deal, or understand where things really started for them. And so I'll use remedies a lot in mental health cases like that.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that the traumas that we carry don't necessarily just have to be our own either. They could be our parents, they could be generational. I think they did a really interesting study where they took the children of Holocaust survivors, and they did some studies on those children. And those children were having PTSD with no trauma ever being done to them. And that PTSD was actually carried on to them from, their parents or grandparents being in the Holocaust.
Yeah. And I mean, that can be both, like you said, epigenetics and the impact that it has on our genes and things like methylation pathways. But then also, there's going to be that kind of behavioral component too, where if you're around someone that's suffering from PTSD and they're reacting constantly and they're in a heightened arousal state, that is then going to impact your cortisol
There's so
levels.
many things to think about there. And as parents, which we both are parents, like, you realize how every little thing you do to your child will affect them, you know,
Yeah.
forever. Which I don't think we have to stress about that, but we have to know that that's the case. So,
Yeah.
but I think you're right. I think there's a genetic component. I think if you're in a trauma situation, certain genes turn on and off. And then when you have a baby in that situation, that baby's genes, some of them will turn on and off. I do think that then that mom PTSD will kind of raise her child in a certain way that might create PTSD behaviors in the child. And then I think there is trauma that is carried down as well too, energetically. And I think we can clear that too. So I think there's multiple things going on in that situation. And if you see in your family that, you know, there's a lot of trauma through the line, if there's a lot of anxiety, depression, etc., it might be something to look at and consider.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned energetics too, because just the nervous system in general is in such an energetic system. And so, you know, not to say that, you know, you're going to get what you attract or get what you put out there, which I do think is true to some degree, but your vibration and your frequency that you're functioning on is how you're going to interact and engage with the world and the world with you. So addressing and kind of stabilizing that nervous system, whether it's through diet or, you know, mind body breath work and yoga or stress reduction or whatever it might be, chiropractic adjustments, but addressing that nervous system imbalance is going to then change how you're reflecting and kind of vibrating at an energetic frequency out to the world and what you'll experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that morning ritual really kind of changes the energetics of your whole day. Like when I miss it, I definitely notice I don't feel as happy or as fulfilled. I don't know. There's something that's different that happens with me. And it's almost like you can't explain it, but something just feels so good when you do your morning ritual. Another morning ritual that I really like is called morning pages. Have you ever done morning pages?
So I usually do 3 grateful things, and I have people do it at night. So I don't know if it's similar.
Oh, okay. I like morning pages because it's basically like at night when you're sleeping, you're working through all the things that happened in your day. You're dreaming. Your subconscious is kind of putting everything in order. You're basically mentally and physically detoxing while you sleep and restoring your system, etc. So when you wake up, it's like you have a bunch of stuff just looming over your head. And if you just start your day and you don't do something to release all of that, it's going to carry with you through the day and affect your day as well too. So if you had a really stressful day yesterday and you don't clear it, so I think you can clear it at night too. But I think when you're sleeping, you work through it. So morning pages is basically waking up and having like a book right next to a journal right next to your bed and waking up and just writing for 3 whole pages. And you might not even know what you're writing. Like, I don't know what I'm writing. I just woke up. But then stuff might start to spill out. Like you might have had dreams that you don't remember that subconsciously you're working through and you kind of spill them out into the paper. And the way that I do it is in my sun salutations in the morning, I actually breathe this out. So anything that's like kind of going in my head. So I think meditation in the morning is really great and you just kind of release it out. But morning pages is another good one. And I think energetically, you're moving it from you to a page. Like you're moving it and you're kind of getting it out of your system. If you do breathing or breath work, then you're breathing it out. And you literally kind of want to imagine your traumas, the things you've been through. So let's say you had a really stressful day yesterday. I like to say that, you know, sometimes when we have traumas, we kind of hold on to them like they're a big, heavy ball, like a weight ball that we're holding on to, and it just kind of sits in us. And then if we don't let go of it, it'll just drag us down. Like it'll just drag us down and it'll weigh through your whole day, through your whole week, etc. And then what we'll tend to do is like do things like drink alcohol or, you know, do things to like release that in a way that's unhealthy. But I think one of the energetic ways that I've really learned is to actually like imagine that it's a ball. Like if I went through something stressful and literally just be like, okay, I'm releasing that ball out of my system and I'm breathing it out when I do sun salutation, or you're releasing that ball onto a paper and you're writing it out and you're going to leave it on the paper and don't take it with you for the rest of the day. So I think energetically, there are things we have power over too. I don't think you just need remedies or you just need, you know, acupuncture to release those. I think if you know that those are energies and you just commit to releasing them, they'll release also. And then it can just make your day a whole lot easier in terms of not carrying around a whole bunch of stuff with you.
Yeah, I think that's also why exercise is such a great release, because there's that physical release aspect in that movement. There's also the balancing of neurotransmitters. There's release of endorphins, and that's like another reason that's a great morning ritual as well. I was just thinking of that as you were talking about releasing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then also understanding what exercise works best for you as far as, balancing your mental health issues. So I have patients that are really, high strung, high anxiety, they're wired, and their cortisol's through the roof. They shouldn't be the gym rats that are going for the cycling class and super
Yeah.
high
Yeah.
intense
Yeah. Yeah.
cardio. Like they
Mm-hmm.
need to chill and do some, calm yin yoga.
Yeah. Or
Or
mix
do
it
some
up at
walking,
least.
or
Or
at
mix
least
it up.
mix it up.
And I
Yeah.
find that those are the people who are like, I cannot meditate, Dr. Fong.
Right.
I can't
Right.
meditate to save my life. I cannot sit still. If
Yeah.
you cannot sit still, you need to meditate even more,
Yeah.
or do something. So if you can't sit still, if you can't sit there quietly, I would play music, like your favorite music. I would play it, and then just so that your mind's still focusing on something, like maybe some relaxing. I would definitely do relaxing music though, and so you could focus on that. If you can't just sit there and be quiet with yourself, just ease into it, But if you're the type of person who's like, I cannot meditate. I am not a meditating person. That's never going to be me. You probably are the person that kind of needs to take it down. You're probably in fire flight for a lot of the day, and learning how to do that is going to be a really great tool, and will probably help mental health significantly.
Yeah, and the opposite true, for more depressed or, not motivated individuals who really just getting out and getting to a class or going for a walk even seems like an insurmountable task. Baby steps, right? Like, okay, well then start with some yoga. Start with literally just drive to the beach and walk to the water, and find some rocks that you like, and that is some movement, and gradually add on to that. So I love that it can go both ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone was saying they love morning pages, and that I think the person said, like, you can ask questions and it'll give you answers. And I think that's really interesting. I think we typically subconsciously know what we want to do, what our answers are, and we listen to our conscious mind, but actually subconsciously, like 90% of what happens in your body is actually subconsciously done, right? Like your digestion and everything. And so if you just quiet your brain, like your conscious mind that's like doing a lot of rattling off, you can actually hear what that subconscious is saying a lot of the time. So I think meditation is a great way of doing that. I think the morning pages is great. Like if you're not a meditating person, you need to be active. I would just write, just keep writing. And oftentimes you will find those answers that you're seeking or searching. And I think a lot of mental health is about feeling happy, feeling fulfilled, feeling like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in this world. And when you don't feel that, then the mental health can dip as well too. So I think knowing what your answers are and not listening to other people's answers is another really important one too.
Yeah. And knowing also, as for me as a practitioner, knowing when you have to listen to your patient and say, okay, there really is something else going on here. So maybe, it is like an underfunctioning thyroid that's creating depression. And maybe that person's been told, oh, it's all in your head, go on antidepressant. If we've worked through a lot of these foundational, routines and habits, and really nothing is changing, dig a little bit deeper, see what else is there. We didn't even talk a ton about, hormones yet, but sometimes there's something physiologically that then is contributing to the mind, body, and to the mental health aspect. Oh, am I frozen?
Yeah, someone's calling me. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, absolutely. And someone asked about prayer, and prayer really is like
I have something about that.
Okay.
It's funny. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I told my dad I would say this. So my dad's a minister. And I saw him this afternoon, and he was saying, I'm going to talk about this in my online church program this week, but the biggest contributor to mental health is generosity. And I said, all right, I promise I'll mention it. So yeah,
I wanted to actually mention that. I think that's so great.
Awesome. Yeah. So prayer can certainly be a form of meditation, and just, having that quiet time, right? For some people, that's their meditation.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's the sense of community that some church might bring for people, or religion, or their spirituality has plays a role in their mental health. But I love that idea of generosity, and just that it doesn't have to do anything to do with religion, right? It's just
Yeah.
giving to others is actually a great way to then receive that positive feeling
Yeah.
back.
I think that's such a great point. I think when I in my life, I would say, in terms of when I figured out that the more I give, the happier I am, and the more I kind of give back to my community, and whether it be my small community, like my family and friends, or the larger community, there's so much more happiness that comes from that. And then they've done studies that show that people are happier when they are contributing to the world in some way, whether it be like just to one other person or to many people. So I think that's a really great, I think for mental health, and like right now, I think that's a really good thing to think about is how can you contribute to the people in your life? And now that we're so like cut off from everybody, I still think there are ways to do that. So like I think that's one of the things that that is causing a lot of this anxiety and depression too, is we're so cut off that we're not having this interaction with people where we can be generous, where we can be giving and get back, and kind of this back and forth.
Think about, on a daily basis, maybe you're the kind of person that likes to cook for people and have people over and entertain and give back in that way. You're not doing it. Or maybe you like, running a boot camp class for your neighbors and exercising. You're not doing that. For me, I'm not seeing patients in person as much, or I'm not giving of myself in that way. And I think that that's something that a lot of people probably are maybe not noticing as a cause, but are having as a cause of some of their struggles right now and stresses.
Yeah. So I think they're going to cut us off soon, but I think
I knew that was going to happen.
I think that I know we could talk about this subject for like hours, I think, but I think if you're suffering from a mental health disorder, as we spoke about today, there's so many things to look at. And I think there's like 10 different check boxes that I need to go through with my patients. And so seeing a naturopathic doctor like myself or Dr. Livingston, we will check off all those boxes and we won't miss anything, right? We'll go from genetics to trauma to nutrition and lifestyle, and we'll check off all those boxes. And then it's oftentimes, it's not one thing you have to do, but as you can see, it is a lifestyle change. It is a, like everything that goes on mentally and physically, we need to work through all of that. And by the end of it, the hope is that there's really a transformation of your whole entire life. That there's no more mental health dysfunction because of everything changing, and you're feeding your system now. There's no toxins floating around. There's no inflammation. The trauma has left you, etc. I think right now the important thing to do is to focus on connecting with people, as we just said, and make sure you're connecting with someone at least once a day. I think at least once a day. And then you do your schedule. Like, don't wake up at 11 a.m. and go to sleep at 3 a.m. just because you can, because you're not going into work. Do your schedule. Wake up at 7 a.m. Put some clothes on. Do your morning rituals. Pretend that you're still going through your day, right? I think that's so important to keep us on our circadian rhythm going, our hormones going. So as you can see, there's so many things we look at as naturopathic doctors. So I just want to end by, if you want to find Dr. Livingston, can you tell us where we can find you, Dr. Livingston?
Yeah, you can go to my Instagram and there's a link in my bio to my website, or you can go to www.rootsteepmedicine.com.
Great. And Dr. Livingston is on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast. And so if you're on the East Coast, I think, I love talking our ways. I feel like we treat very similarly. We always look at the mental health picture in terms of treating any case. So whether you're coming to us for like a tummy ache or eczema, we're always going to ask you about the mental health picture. It's always part of the picture, right, Dr. Livingston? Oh, she's frozen.
Oh, no.
And then if you,
yes, I agree.
You got frozen. But And then I offer a free masterclass every Tuesday and Thursday. And in my free masterclass, I'll go over, I show you slides and I go over kind of all of these pieces of the puzzle, not just to treat mental health, but to treat all types of chronic illness. I also have a quiz on my website. If you go to naturalstartmedicine.com, or actually if you click the link on my profile, on the top right hand corner, you could take a quiz and find out how balanced your systems are and how balanced your organs are. And I also do discovery consultations. So reach out to Dr. Livingston, especially if you're on the East Coast. And we're going to do this again, right? Dr. Livingston, let's do this again. Yeah. If you guys have any topics that you want us to talk about, please reach out to us and let us know. And we'd love to do this every week and just talk about new subjects.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Have a great Saturday, great weekend, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.